Welcome back everyone. If you are watching this video after watching all of the lecture videos from Chapter 1, the fundamentals of interpretation, and Chapter 2, the basic skills of interpretation, and actually paid attention, I would like to let you know that you now have the knowledge and skills needed to start interpreting. But I know you probably still feel not quite ready. So that's why I prepared this next chapter, chapter number 3, in real life. In this chapter, first we are going to go over the call flow, how the actual calls will flow in real life and also in very specific situations that you are going to encounter for sure when you work as an interpreter. Then, for those specific situations, I am actually going to give you some call examples, where you will be able to see and hear how the call goes, even if you don't speak my language, which is Korean. I also have prepared some common sentences that you will have to interpret as a remote interpreter on a daily basis, and you can use this to practice your interpreting. Lastly, I am going to wrap up Part 1, Introduction to Interpreting, with some of the most frequently asked questions that I always got from my new interpreters, so you can quench your thirst of curiosity. Before we get started, I just want to clarify one thing. This is going to be heavily focused on remote interpreting, such as working as an OPI or VRI. So some of these aspects might not be exactly applicable for on-site interpreting, but really the fundamental ideas should be the same. Well, if you're ready, let's talk about the first topic, most common call flow. To explain the call flow for a typical remote interpreting call, I think I can split a call into 3 parts. 1, opening, or what we call the pre-session. 2, interpreting, which is the main session where we interpret for our clients and LEPs. Then lastly, 3, closing. This is where we are going to wrap up the call. For our opening, I want to talk about some specific situations that we will encounter as a remote interpreter. That is A, when LEP is present on the call, and B, when we need to dial out. I will explain further what this situation will look like, but this is not the only cases we will have, actually. We will also talk about when we dial out, what happens when we get connected to our LEP, or 2, not connected to the LEP but connected to a voicemail, or 3, not connected at all. First, let's talk about our opening, aka the pre-session. When I say opening or pre-session, this is the time when the interpreters will say hi, introduce themselves to both clients and LEPs, and provide the instructions or disclaimers that they should know. Let me start off with the situation when we have both client and LEP on the line. As soon as you answer the call, you will typically start by saying, "Thank you for calling. My name is Mason, ID number 12345. I will be your Korean interpreter today. Is the Korean speaker with you, or would you like me to call them for you?" This is in fact a very standard introduction that many LSPs will use. However, depending on the LSP, you might have a different introduction that you have to do. Obviously, I cannot tell you the exact introduction, but this will be definitely covered in your orientation or during the onboarding process, so there is nothing to worry about. This opening statement that you see has many different parts. Let me break it down for you. First, we always start by greeting. The most typical greeting would be, "Thank you for calling." Some companies add their company name. So for example, "Thank you for calling ABC Language Services." However, the vast majority of LSPs will not add their company name. I am not going to explain why in this video, but you will see that it is indeed very common that LSPs tell their interpreters not to say their company name on the call. When you are working, just make sure what the policy is and just be sure to adhere to that policy. Next, we share our first name and the ID. When we say our name, we will generally share just our first name, not our last name. I have been with LSPs that said we should share the initial of my last name, some LSPs have mentioned that I am not required to provide my name at all. Once again, this should be clarified by your company, but I believe the standard is that you provide your first name and the interpreter ID number that's also provided to you by your LSP. Next thing we disclose in our opening statement is our language. You might think that this is not that important because our client is the one who requested for a specific language interpreter, but it is surprisingly common that clients get connected to a wrong interpreter. For instance, I cannot count how many times I had clients who needed a Korean interpreter or Haitian Creole interpreter instead of Korean. Just because they can't really tell the differences and the name of the languages kind of sounds similar, I guess. Anyway, the point is that we should always clearly state which language we interpret. Next would be asking if a dial out is needed. When I say a dial out, it means we, the interpreters, are placing an outbound call to an LEP. This dial out function is available and done through your LSP's platform. So you're not going to be charged with long distance calls, charged on your personal cell phone bill or anything. How the dial out is actually placed will vary depending on the platform your LSP uses. And once again, they will all be covered before you start working. Another thing that I want to add is that depending on your LSP and depending on your client, you might have to add this disclaimer. It's usually something like, this call may be monitored for quality assurance purposes, or this call will be recorded for training purposes. You must be extremely careful with these disclaimers, and it is your responsibility to know what you have to say, if you have to say, and when you have to say. Once you are done with your opening statement, your client will usually introduce themselves as well. Hello, Mason. My name is Melissa. I'm a nurse at San Francisco General Hospital. I have my patient, Mr. Kim, with me here, so please go ahead and introduce yourself. Although the interpreting session has not started, I think it is generally a good idea to keep brief notes about who the client is in case you need to call them by their names later. We will often quickly acknowledge by saying something like, yes, for sure, or yes, certainly. Then we will switch our language to the LEP's language and say our opening statement. Now, I want you to notice how our opening statement is different from earlier. Earlier, we broke down our opening statement into different categories to have a more detailed look. Do you notice anything different? When we are introducing ourselves to the LEP, we still greet them by saying hi or hello, but we don't necessarily say thank you for calling because generally LEP isn't the one who gives us a call. There are some LSPs that have the system where the LEP can call us first before our client is connected to the line, but it's not very common. When you are receiving a call, I would say 99% of the time, it will be a client that's calling requiring your service. So that's for greeting. And what do we do next? Well, to our client, we mentioned our name and ID, but to our LEP, we are not doing that, right? For this as well, some LSPs might ask you to share your name to our LEPs as well, but that's also not very common in my opinion. One thing I can say for sure is that we never share interpreter ID with our LEPs. I have worked for about 8 different LSPs in the past. I never had to share my IDs with them because our customer is a client, not the LEP. So remember, unless your LSP asks otherwise, we do not share our name or ID with our LEP. Next, we do mention our language where we say we are the English interpreter. I want to mention it is also extremely common that many LEPs think we are the client, not the interpreter, especially when we give them a call. So often LEPs would answer the call and they hear someone who speaks their language. They will just start talking right away, thinking that they are speaking to a representative, and we do not want that. That's why it is important to let them know clearly that we are the interpreter. Then the disclaimer. The disclaimers you see here, I will interpret everything you say and everything you say will be kept confidential, is what we know as medical call disclaimers because we usually state these for medical calls due to HIPAA regulations. Once again, your LSP will clearly mention which disclaimers must be used for which calls. So as long as you pay attention, you will not be in any trouble. Lastly, we obviously do not ask our LEP if the dial-out is needed because we don't place any outbound calls for our LEPs. We will talk about this more later. So again, this is the first thing you say to the LEP. I hope you can see the differences clearly now. When you say this, here is what's going to happen. I would say 7 out of 10 times, as soon as you start talking in your LEP's language, they will go, "Oh, thank you so much, interpreter. Yes, so the reason why I came here is because my back hurts, blah, 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 blah." Many interpreters get stuck here because, the LEP is telling you important things. However, we actually haven't started our interpreting session yet. We are still in our pre-session, meaning we actually haven't started interpreting. So when your LEP all of a sudden starts talking and talking, you will need to stop them. Politely, but firmly. "I'm sorry, sir. One moment, please. Ma'am, I apologize. Could you just wait one moment? Thank you." Something like this. Of course, you would say this in your LEP's language. Sometimes they will fight you. They don't stop talking and keep trying to talk over you, but you have to just clearly let them know that if they don't follow your pace, then you're not going to be able to do your job. So everybody loses here. So in that case, I usually pause for a second or two and just repeat firmly, "Sir, please wait one moment. I'll get back to you shortly." Once they stop talking, then you are going to turn your face to our client and say, "Thank you for your patience, Melissa. I am ready for your instructions now." This is how we end our pre-session. The proper way to finish our pre-session is to always let our client to take the lead. We do so by telling them that interpreter is ready and that they are free to go ahead with their conversation. Also, I always hear so many interpreters get confused with using the I language here. Many people ask, don't we have to say that we are the interpreter here? But technically speaking, we are not interpreting just yet. But once we say that we are ready to start, that's when we will switch our gears and stick to the conduit role. Now let's have a look at the situation where the client needs us to dial out. So the same situation, we got a call, we answer and say, "Thank you for calling, my name is Mason, ID number 12345, I'll be your Korean interpreter, blah, blah, blah." If you have not worked as an interpreter yet, you might think maybe you should memorize this or something. Trust me, you don't need to try because sooner or later, this will just live in your brain. I do have a notepad with all the opening statements for each company so I know which one to say when I get a call. But honestly, after years of doing this, I have it all in my brain and it's just a muscle memory at this point. And trust me, you will be doing the same thing. So don't stress out. Our client says, "Hey interpreter, my name is Melissa, blah, blah, blah. My patient is not here. Could you please call him?" So now we know that we need to place a dial out. There are going to be a list of information that we need to gather before placing an outbound call. First, we ask the LEP's name. I usually ask for the full name, including the middle name for my language, just because many Korean names we mainly have first and last name, but often the first name is split into two parts, so it becomes a middle name. This can get confusing, so I just always ask for their full name, but that doesn't mean you have to. If you think knowing their last name is sufficient, then that should be fine. But generally, I think it is better to have their full name, just in case we run into trouble of identifying them. So we ask, may I have the full name of the patient, please? Then the nurse will give us the name, let's say Mr. John Kim. Next, we ask for their phone number. Yes, it's 123-456-7890. It's a made-up number if you didn't notice, so don't call that number, please. One thing about the phone number, or any number really, is that I always double check. So once I get the phone number from my client, I double check by saying, let me confirm, it's 123-456-7890. Correct? Then they will say, yes, it's correct, or no, it's actually blah, blah, blah. Lastly, you check if we need to leave any messages. I usually say something like this. In case we reach Mr. Kim's voicemail, would you like me to leave any messages with your callback number? Yes, please. Say, this is Melissa from San Francisco General Hospital. Please call me back as soon as possible. My number is 888-123-1234. Sometimes the client will say, we don't need to, but often they will give you the message to leave in the mailbox. Make sure you take notes, and once again, if the callback number is provided, double check that as well. Let me double check your callback number. That's 888-123-1233, correct? I hope you noticed. That's not correct. Mistakes can happen, so that's why we double check and confirm. Our clients will correct us. No, it's 1234, not 1233. Then you give Mr. Kim a call. On how to actually placing a dial out, as I mentioned, that will be different depending on which platform or website your LSP is using. It is fairly simple. You basically just have to put the phone number in, and sometimes you have to conference the call, meaning you have to merge the calls in together, but long story short, you will be given with a detailed instruction from your LSP on how to place a dial out. Let's say it is dialing now. And let's suppose our LEP picked up our call. We first say, in our LEP's language, hello, is this Mr. John Kim? And this is the reason why we had to get the LEP's name from our client, because we need to make sure that this is the LEP that's on the phone. Often our LEPs will just go, who's this? Where are you calling from? Because they never trust anybody on the phone, especially with the number of spam calls they get. Then we first explain, not interpret, what this call is for. We tell them, hi, Mr. Kim, you got a call from Melissa. She is a nurse at San Francisco General Hospital. I'm your Korean interpreter. And once again, our LEP might start talking, and remember, we are still in the pre-session here, so the main session hasn't started yet. So what do? We politely but firmly tell our LEP, one moment please. Then we go back to the client and say, thank you for your patience. I have Mr. Kim on the line now, and I'm ready for your instructions. After that, the client will start talking, and which we will interpret from this point. I hope this is making sense so far. Let's suppose we dialed out, but it went into the LEP's voicemail this time. After ringing, you hear, 123-456-7890 is not available. Please leave your message after the tone. Beep. So what should we say? This is when we are going to use the info that we received from our client before we place the dial out. We will say, of course, in the LEP's language, hi, this is a message for Mr. John Kim. I am a Korean interpreter leaving a message for Miss Melissa, who is a nurse at San Francisco General Hospital. Please call her back at 888-123-1234. Once again, the number is 888-123-1234. Thank you. One thing you should notice is that I am once again repeating the phone number there. I just think it is a good practice, no matter what language you're speaking, that you repeat the number so the LEP doesn't have to listen to the whole message again in case they didn't get the number the first time. If your language has different ways of reading out the numbers, I also highly suggest reading it differently from the first time so it's even more clear. For example, in English, we can say 888-123-1234, But also, we can read it as 888, 123, 1234. If you can do something like this in the LEP's language, I would highly recommend doing that. Another thing to note is that here we actually do not speak in the third person. We don't say, I'm the nurse, please call me back. And the reason is leaving a voicemail without clarifying that this is the interpreter will often confuse the LEP, and they will think that it will be a Korean speaking person when they return the call. So it is very important that we clearly state that we are the interpreter and we are leaving a message on behalf of our client. Once we are done with leaving a message, we tell the client that we left a message and ask if we should try calling the same number one more time, or if they have a different number that we can try calling. If there is a secondary number, then we will double check the number and confirm the message that we leave is going to be the same. Now this time, let's see what happens if it doesn't get connected and the LEP does not have a mailbox set up or have a full mailbox. You will often hear something like 12345678990 is not available and has no mailbox set up. Please try your call again. Goodbye. Or the person's mailbox is full and can no longer receive messages. Please try your call again. Something like that. In this case, nothing changes. We still inform the client what happened and ask if we should try one more time or if she has a different number we can try. I personally have listened to many interpreters' calls where they go, hi, they didn't answer, and they say nothing else. We want them to feel like we are here to help. And so just like when we are using our interpreter's tools, don't just state the problem, provide a solution. Once we are done with our pre-session, we are now going to move on to our main session, which is interpreting. There really isn't much to talk about the interpreting because that's literally what we have talked about in the past lecture videos. So just remember the things we talked about, the code of ethics, 4 roles of interpreters, how we speak in the first person, how we use those 5 interpreting skills, how we utilize the 3 interpreters tools, maintaining the register, using a picture word. All of these are what we will constantly think about when we're interpreting. However, there is one specific situation that I would like to talk about, and that's when we are being put on hold. Let's say the client is transferring the interpreter and the LEP to a different department, which happens quite frequently in real life. Or maybe the client is asking us to wait while they look up how to solve this LEP's problem. Your company, the LSP, will have a specific policy on the hold time. Generally speaking, many LSPs will require 10 to 15 minute hold time, meaning the interpreter can only wait up to 10 to 15 minutes, and if the client does not come back, that the interpreter has to disconnect from the line. However, often many LSPs will state that if the client is specifically asking for a longer hold time, say 20 minutes until the doctor comes into the room, that interpreters are allowed and recommended to wait until the client comes in. The reason why many LSPs will have this specific hold time policy is to prevent what we know as a dead air. The term dead air is used in the quality assurance department when the interpreter is staying on the line when their service is no longer needed. This can happen to interpreters by accident, or sometimes unethical interpreters will take advantage of dead air situations by not hanging up when their service is clearly no longer needed. I don't think we need to talk too much about this, but here is my 2 cents as a person who listens to other interpreters' calls. You will get caught. You might get lucky and get away once or twice, but when this becomes a pattern, it is really not going to be that difficult for your LSPs to track these calls down. So my advice is don't do it. Doing this thinking, wow, I'm on the call but not interpreting. This is like making free money. could literally get you fired the next week. Is it worth? I don't think so. Once you inform the hold policy to our client, you should also inform the LEP about what's happening. Simply say that we are being transferred and the interpreter will stay on the line. Once you inform both parties about the hold policy, you and your LEP will be put on hold, where you will usually listen to some funky hold music. Some LSPs will ask you to remind the LEP that you are on hold with them every minute, every 3 minutes, 5 minutes, or something like that. I personally don't think this is completely necessary because sometimes I think it can get really annoying. So just letting them know by saying we're still on hold if the LEP is checking if you're still in the line. Once again, here, if you for some reason ignore the LEP, they might think the call has been dropped and they might drop the call too, which is definitely something that we don't want. So make sure you answer when they are checking if you are still on the line. This might be slightly off topic, but just for your information, when our clients are transferring LEP and the interpreter to another department, there are actually two different types of transfers. One is called a cold transfer, and the other is called a warm transfer, or sometimes a soft transfer. The main difference between a cold transfer and a warm transfer is that when the transfer is cold, the LEP and the interpreter who are transferred will be connected to a new client who has absolutely no idea who we are. The previous client is already disconnected from the call, and the caller basically has to repeat everything from the beginning. However, when the transfer is warm, often the original client will stay on the line to explain the situation to the new client, or only disconnect from the call after delivering all the information about the current call to the new client so that the new client will be able to help a lot better. Even if you have not worked as a customer service representative before, I am sure you can tell which one is going to be more effective when it comes to bringing up customer satisfaction. Indeed, our job is going to be much easier when it is a warm transfer because the new client knows that there is an interpreter on the line and all we have to do is to remain as a conduit and service the call. But often the reality is that many places, especially busy hospitals or clinics, will only do a cold transfer because it just takes way less time and labor, I guess. Here is, let's say, the transfer was done cold, and we have a new client, Jeff, who has no idea who is calling. I will say, hello, Jeff. My name is Mason, the Korean interpreter. We have a patient, Mr. John Kim, on the line with us. We were transferred to this department by Melissa, who is a nurse. One easy way to understand this would be just thinking it like we are doing the pre-session again. Since the client is new and they have no background information, it will be a good idea to let them know that you are the interpreter and that you were transferred together with the patient. However, it technically isn't a pre-session because we are not required to do all of our introduction with the opening statement. Occasionally, the new client will ask for our ID number, which we'll provide if they do. When the calls are transferred, often new clients will have to verify the LEP's identity again. So they often ask verification questions for information such as LEP's full name, date of birth, phone number, address, and the last 4 digits of social security number, etc. At this point, I would quickly turn myself into a conduit and start interpreting right away. In some cases, it might be beneficial that the interpreter provides a brief explanation of the current situation for the sake of call flow management. But generally, I don't think we should answer questions on behalf of our LEP when we can simply be an interpreter and ask the questions directly to the LEP. Here is the last part, the closing. We are going to first have a look at our regular closing situation. Then, let's also talk about some specific situations when one party or all parties are disconnected from the call. Let's say we had a good session. Towards the end of the call, usually the client will ask something like this. Do you have any other questions? Or was there anything else? Which we'll just interpret. And let's say the LEP answered saying, no, that's all. Thank you, Miss Melissa, and thank you, interpreter. For a remark that was directly said to the interpreter by the LEP in this manner, I usually do not interpret, but only when I know that omitting this remark is not going to cause any harm or confusion. So I will simply render, no more question. Thank you, Miss Melissa. Now the client will say thank you. This is actually really common at the end of the call, well, at least at the end of a good call, that everyone keeps thanking each other, and you just interpret, thank you, thank you, thank you. It just never ends. Eventually, you will have to put an end to this and ask this final question to the client. This is the interpreter speaking. Is there anything else that I can do for you today? Or, hi, is there anything else for the interpreter? Something like this. Many LSPs will indeed make this a default proper closing statement. We always ask the client if there's anything else that needs to be done. Once we have the confirmation by the client that we are good to disconnect, that's when we say, thank you for using our services. Every single language service provider that I have been with uses this line as the closing statement. Thank you for using our services. We generally don't say the company name unless your LSP states otherwise. To make it super clear that the interpreter is going to disconnect from the call, we could also add interpreter disconnecting from the call. Goodbye. Next, let's talk about when the LEP is disconnected. We are having a good session, everyone is talking, and you are busy interpreting, and suddenly you don't hear anything from the LEP side. Usually the client will check by saying something like, hello, are you still there, Mr. Kim? Or sometimes they might ask the interpreter directly if the line has been disconnected. Either way, we'll ask the same question. Sir, are you still there? Of course, in our LEP's language. When this happens, the client may ask you to dial out to the patient. Then we'll just place a dial out as we talked about earlier. Sometimes the client will ask, oh well, that's all then. Thank you, interpreter. Then we should close the call properly by saying, thank you for using our services, and disconnect from the call. Easy peasy, right? Let's say the same situation, but the client is disconnected this time. Same thing, we were talking, then the client just disappeared. We will basically try to ask the same question to the client, asking if they are still on the line and inform that you are not able to hear anything in case it is their microphone problem. I usually try to ask if they can hear me at least like 3 times, maybe waiting 6 to 7 seconds between each time. If I still don't hear anything from the client, I will say this. I will inform your patient to give you a call again. We say this just in case the client is actually having a microphone issue, and in case they are able to hear us, we still want to remain professional and provide them a solution so that the client can continue to help our LEP. Then I will inform my LEP saying, the client has been disconnected. Please hang up and call again. If you need, you can always request an interpreter when you call back. The thing is, when I say this to my LEPs usually aren't very happy. They will start complaining saying, oh, I have been waiting 2 hours to finally get connected. And they will often ask you to call the client directly. Now, I know that we are able to place the dial out, so you might be feeling nice and say that you can call, especially if you still have the client's callback number from our pre-session, but we do not do that. I have never heard of an instance where the interpreter is placing an outbound call for an LEP when the client is disconnected. It is possible to dial out to another party upon LEP's request if we have the client's permission. But in this case, clearly, we cannot get client's permission because they're not on the line. So we have to politely decline and tell our LEP that they have to call back. Once again, they are not going to sound very happy. my piece of advice, just try to stay professional. LEP will eventually give up and say they will call back. We politely thank them and apologize for inconvenience once again. To close the call, although I know that there is no client on the line, I still end it with, thank you for using our services, interpreter disconnecting. I don't know. I guess there's a chance that the client is still on the line, just still having a microphone problem, but honestly, it's just a habit at this point. Hello, thank you for calling. My name is Mason, ID number 12345. I will be your Korean interpreter today. Is the Korean speaker with you, or would you like me to call them for you?
Hi, sorry, what's your name and ID number again?
My name is Mason, spelled M as in Mary, A as in Apple, S as in Sam, O as in Oscar, N as in Nancy, and my interpreter ID number is 12345.
Thank you, Mason. My name is Lisa, calling from the ABC Health Insurance Company. I do have my Korean-speaking member. His name is Min, last name Park. I will bring him on now.
Thank you.
Mr. Park, are you still there?
Yes.
I have an interpreter. His name is Mason. Interpreter, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you. 네, 안녕하세요. 네. 저는 선생님의 통역을 맡은 한국어 통역사입니다. 전화에 나오는 모든 내용을 통역해드리게 되고요. 모든 내용은 비밀 보장이 됩니다. 말씀을 정확하게 통역해드리기 위해 말씀을 최대한 짧게 해주시면 감사하겠습니다. 네, 다름이 아니라요. 네, 선생님 잠시만 기다려주세요. 예. Hello, Lisa. Thank you for your patience. I am ready for your instructions now.
Great. Mr. Park, can you verify your date of birth for me?
네, 박 선생님, 먼저 생년월일 한번 확인해 주실까요? 예? 뭐요? 아니, 제가 귀가 잘 안 들려요. This is the interpreter speaking. Mr. Park just mentioned that he is hard of hearing and couldn't hear the interpreter. I'll go ahead and repeat the question.
Yes, please. Thank you.
네, 박 선생님, 먼저 본인의 생년월일 말씀해 주시겠어요? 아, 예. 1937년 1월 24일입니다. My date of birth is January 24th, 1937.
May I have a callback number just in case we get disconnected?
저희가 만약에 전화가 끊어질 경우를 대비해서 선생님 전화번호 좀 말씀해 주시겠습니까? 가만히 있자. 전화번호가요. 213-544 01126이에요. Interpreter would like to double check the phone number with Mr. Park. One moment, please.
Sure.
네, 선생님. 전화번호 213544 다음에 다시 한 번만 말씀해 줘 보시겠어요? 0126. My callback number is 213-544-0126. Hello, thank you for calling. My name is Mason, ID number 12345. I will be your Korean interpreter today. Is the Korean speaker with you, or would you like me to call them for you?
Hello, interpreter. My patient is not with me. Can you give him a call?
Yes, for sure. May I start with the patient's full name, please?
Yes, his first name is Jung, Jung. Last name Lee, Lee.
Thank you. May I have their phone number, please?
It's 213-555-6789.
Let me confirm the number. It was 213-555-6789.
That's correct.
In case we reach his voicemail, would you like me to leave a message and your callback number?
Sure. Please say, "Hi, Mr. Lee. This is Dr. Lang calling back from United Hospital. We got your blood exam results ready, so please give us a call back at 866-887-7878. Thank you."
Let me confirm the callback number. That was 866-887-7878. Is that correct?
That's correct.
One moment while I place a call.
Thank you.
네, 여보세요? 네, 안녕하세요. 혹시 이정 선생님 되실까요? 예, 제가 이정복입니다. 누구세요? 네, 안녕하세요. 저는 선생님의 통역을 맡고 있는 한국어 통역사이고요. 지금 유나이티드 병원에서 의사 선생님이신 닥터 랭 선생님께서 전화 주셨습니다. 피 검사 결과 관련해서 연락 주셨거든요. 잠시만 기다려 주시면 제가 전화 통역 도와드리게 되는데요. 몇 가지 안내 말씀 간단히 드리고 시작하겠습니다. 예. 전화 중에 하시는 모든 말씀 통역해드리게 되고 모든 내용은 비밀 보장이 됩니다. 정확하게 통역을 해드리기 위해서 말씀 짧게 해주시면 정말 감사하겠습니다. 예. Hello, doctor. Thank you for your patience. We have Mr. Lee on the phone with us, and I'm ready for your instructions now.
Thank you, interpreter. Hello, Mr. Lee. So we got your blood exam results, and it looks like everything is looking good.
네, 선생님, 저희가 피 검사 결과 받았는데요. 다 좋아 보입니다. 예, 감사합니다. 전립선 관련해서 수치 검사한 건 어떻게 됐나요? Thank you. How about the results for the test I got regarding my prostate?
Yes, we can talk about that right now. Actually, just give me one moment while I go find that test result. Interpreter, can you hold?
This is the interpreter speaking. Yes, I will be happy to. Would you be able to tell me how long it will take approximately?
Oh, I'll be back in less than 5 minutes.
For sure, I will go ahead and inform Mr. Lee about the hold.
Thank you. I'll be right back.
네, 선생님, 전립선 관련 검사도 제가 말씀드릴 수 있는데요. 제가 지금 그 검사 결과를 찾아봐야 해서 한 5분 정도 기다려 주실 수 있으시면 감사하겠습니다. 네, 그러세요. 네, 감사합니다.
Hey, interpreter, are you there?
Yes, the interpreter is still on the line.
Thank you. Is Mr. Lee still on the phone?
선생님, 아직 전화상에 계실까요? 예. Yes.
Great. So your PSA level is slightly elevated, but nothing to be concerned about.
감사합니다. 그래서 보니까 PSA 전립선 검사 수치가 살짝 높아졌는데요. 너무 걱정할 정도는 아닌 것으로 보입니다. Hello, thank you for calling. My name is Mason, ID number 12345. I will be your Korean interpreter today. Is the Korean speaker with you, or would you like me to call them for you?
Hello, interpreter. My patient is not with me. Can you give him a call?
Yes, for sure. May I start with the patient's full name, please?
Yes, his first name is Jung, Jung. Last name Lee, Lee.
Thank you. May I have their phone number, please?
It's 213-555-6789.
Let me confirm the number. It was 213-555-6789.
That's correct.
In case we reach his voicemail, would you like me to leave a message and your callback number?
Sure. Please say, "Hi, Mr. Lee. This is Dr. Lang calling back from United Hospital. We got your blood exam results ready, so please give us a call back at 866-887-7878.
Let me confirm the callback number. That was 866-887-7878. Is that correct?
That's correct.
One moment while I place a call.
Thank you.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice message system. 213-555-6789 is not available. Please leave your message after the tone.
네, 선생님 안녕하세요. 이 메시지는 이정 선생님께 드리는 메시지입니다. 저는 선생님의 통역을 맡고 있는 한국어 통역사이고요. 전화 주신 곳은 유나이티드 병원에서 닥터 랭 선생님께서 연락을 주셨습니다. 이 선생님의 혈액 검사 결과를 말씀드리려고 전화 주셨는데요. 전화를 못 받아주셔서 통역사가 음성 메시지를 대신해서 남기고 있습니다. 다시 닥터 랭 선생님께 전화를 주시면 감사하겠습니다. 의사 선생님의 전화번호는 866-887-7878번입니다. 다시 전화번호는 866-887-7878번입니다. 감사합니다. Hello, doctor. The interpreter left a message for Mr. Lee. Was there anything else that I can do for you today?
No, that is all. Thank you so much, interpreter.
Not a problem. Thank you for using our services. I hope you have a great day.
You too. Take care.
Interpreter disconnecting from the call. Welcome back, everyone. This is going to be officially the last chapter of Part 1, Introduction to Interpreting. I mean, of course, there is Part 2 that you will need to go through, but if you have watched all my lecture videos so far, you should have a pretty good idea how the interpreting works. But I know you might still have some itchy spots in your brain, some very specific questions that maybe I never covered. In this lesson, I'm going to be making a series of videos to answer commonly asked questions. I decided to end part 1 of this course with this lesson because I remember when I first started out, I had so many questions, but there was no one who could give me a clear answer. So that's why I'm going to answer some questions that I had before and most common questions that I received from my previous trainees. Also, I want to answer your question too. Once you finish this chapter, if you still have questions, please write me an email or leave a comment on my YouTube video. What I'm going to do is I am going to make a video about your question and simply add another one to this lesson so it becomes a Q&A archive for interpreters. I hope this is all clear. Let's have a look at the first question. Question number 1, what kind of calls do we get? Where do these calls come from? As a remote contractor interpreter, meaning you are hired by a language service provider and you either get paid per minute or per hour, you will get many different kind of calls, and that solely depends on the clientele base of your LSP. So simple talk, your LSP will have many different companies and organizations like TD Bank, Airbnb, and AAA, which purchase the LSP's remote interpreting service that we, the interpreters, provide. If your LSP has a contract with the state of California's Department of Social Services, then you could be getting calls regarding Medi-Cal or CalFresh. So basically, the calls we get will really depend on your company. Generally, the bigger the LSP, the more various types of calls that we get. If you work for a company that doesn't have many different clients, you will most likely get same or similar calls when you work. Now, this can be a good thing and a bad thing, right? Some might like it because it's relatively easier as you will feel more comfortable from receiving similar calls. But also, this means your work can be really boring. Just for your reference, here is a very short list of the companies that I interpreted for working at different LSPs. Many customer service calls from TD Bank, Citibank, Airbnb, Bookings.com, AAA, where I am interpreting for a customer service rep of those companies, and a Korean LEP who is a customer. For medical calls, many different hospitals and clinics all over the US and Canada, some in the UK, many health insurance companies like Anthem Blue Cross, Blue Shield, Cigna, KP, the Kaiser Permanente, United Healthcare, Molina, etc. Some LSPs, usually the big ones, will also take 911 calls, like EMS, the Emergency Medical Service, or calls from police department as well. There are definitely some LSPs that will take legal calls. The thing about legal calls is that usually the LSPs won't send them to any interpreters. So before you get hired, they will most likely tell you whether you will be getting legal calls or not, because they definitely want you to have sufficient experience and credential for these calls. Question number 2. What should I do if I don't know how to interpret something? Well, I don't feel very happy that I have to answer this question at this point, because if you have paid attention during my lecture videos, you should be able to answer this question yourself, right? If you are watching this video and you have no idea how to answer this question, then that definitely means you should go back and watch my previous lecture videos first. Still, to give you some short answers, we use our tools. Remember, we talked about the 5 interpreting skills and 3 interpreters tools, right? I'm not going to explain this again here, and I hope you remember these. Also very important, we should always use our resources. When I say resources, I mean everything. Google search, YouTube, dictionary, Wikipedia. One time I went on even Amazon to look up the name of this specific item to find out how other people usually say this thing in English. I have heard from my trainees asking me, isn't it cheating if I use Google Translate while I interpret? I mean, maybe yes when you are taking an exam, because the purpose of an exam is usually to test your level of knowledge and skill. So in that sense, I don't think you should do that. But when it comes to interpreting in real life, use whatever you can use if that can help you interpret better. My opinion, if you have to literally type every utterance into a Google Translate and you are reading the translation out to work as an interpreter, I personally don't think you will go very far. That sounds ridiculously time consuming, and I just don't see how that can work unless you have robot arms or something. We talked about this too, lowering the register or using a picture word. I hope this brings back old memories, although I don't think it was that far ago. I understand, especially if you have never worked as an interpreter before, that you will feel worried. I was too. But as we have learned, there are definitely things we can do in situations where we cannot interpret something. My piece of advice is to stay calm and professional. If it is your first day of interpreting, try to have the confidence like you have been doing this for 10 years. If you have been doing this for 10 years, try to have the attitude that you had on your first day. I hope that makes sense. Question number 3. What do I do if the client or LEP uses foul language? Surprisingly, this was honestly one of the most common questions that I received from my past trainees. So what do we do in this case? Well, to be honest, I never had a client who was swearing on a call because, they were working too. It's usually the LEP that's using foul language, and I definitely had this before. Still, it doesn't happen too often. So technically speaking, as an interpreter, we should interpret everything that is being said on the call. Meaning, we are going to stay as a conduit, a ball when we're interpreting. But also, that doesn't sound very good in some situations because I did mention we deliver the tone, but we do not mimic, right? So my answer would be using your best judgment. In my opinion, if the call has any characteristics of legal calls in any way, such as this is a police officer investigating an LEP, or this is a claims adjuster from an auto insurance company taking recorded statements from our LEP, in such cases, I would probably interpret even the foul language as best as I can. I will of course add as a clarifier that this is what's happening so our client understands what's going on. Remember, we talked about the transparency, right? In some cases, I might ask the client if they want to hear it or not. Many customer service calls or medical calls, they know our LEP is not happy. And that's all they need to know sometimes. So I can just check in with them to see if they want to hear it. If they do, sure, have fun. Try your best to interpret the foul language. If not, we just move on professionally. One thing that I really want to emphasize is that when LEPs use foul language to the interpreter, some interpreters take this too personally. I understand it doesn't feel good when somebody is yelling and swearing at your face, but just because that's what's happening, that doesn't mean you have to pay back. Some interpreters will literally, verbally fight back, and once again, I understand where it's coming from, but please take the high road, because this really doesn't solve anything in my opinion, and trust me, you might be in a really bad mood in that specific moment. Just give yourself some time, and you will be laughing about it, and it will be all become sort of a funny memory. I hope that's understandable. Question number 4. Are the calls recorded? Will I get in trouble for misinterpreting something? This is a very good question. To answer the first question, it all depends on your LSP and their client's policy. From what I know, many LSPs actually do not record all of their calls because, that's a lot of data. And when it comes to that large amount of data, I'm guessing it gets really expensive for companies to keep them. However, another big reason is the legal aspect. Some calls can get recorded, and when the calls are recorded, interpreters are required to explicitly state that the calls are recorded. Another thing I have to explain here is the difference between the call being recorded and being monitored. When we say recorded, the call is stored. If I want to listen to the call that happened last month, I can go back and listen to it anytime. That's recorded. When the call is monitored, the call is not stored. It can be only listened to in that moment. When does this happen? That's when the LSP's quality assurance team is working. As I mentioned, I do call monitoring work as well for different LSPs. Some companies will give me access to recorded calls. Some companies will schedule me a specific time and date to monitor our other interpreters' calls. There, I am able to listen to different interpreters' live calls, and I provide feedback whether they are servicing calls up to the LSP's standard. When calls are either recorded or monitored, interpreters will provide some kind of disclaimers at the opening, the pre-session, as we talked about. It typically sounds something like these, but they change. So as an interpreter, what you have to look out for is when you have to interpret this to our LEPs. When it comes to interpreting disclaimers to our LEPs, we say we interpret it in verbatim, meaning we will strictly keep it word for word. So make sure you don't mix up maybe and will be, or monitored and recorded, because they are definitely different. To talk about the second portion of the question, whether you get in trouble for misinterpreting or not, I would like to say something as a QA person. I know it sounds a bit ironic, but when I am monitoring other interpreters' calls, I am not too concerned about the misinterpretation. Don't get me wrong, accuracy and completeness are really important. We should not take that lightly, but I also understand that we are all just humans. We are not robots. Interpreters are humans. So misinterpreting is going to happen no matter how perfect you are. Maybe you're having a bad day. Maybe you got distracted for a second. I wholeheartedly believe that we should not be judged by one single mistake that can happen to anybody. Again, I am not suggesting that you shouldn't care about accuracy and completeness, but I don't think you should be feeling terrified to the point you think having one bad call will ruin your career. However, there are things that can get you in trouble, the red flags that I'm looking for when I am monitoring calls. First, people stealing money. Of course, we can't do that physically as an interpreter, but as I mentioned last time, purposely going on dead air, meaning staying on the call when you're supposed to disconnect, or interpreters who don't treat others with respect, showing poor customer service to our clients, speaking in a rude and condescending tone to our LEPs, and interpreters who clearly don't give a single crap about accuracy and completeness, always speaking in monotone. These are all red flags that I think many LSPs are trying to catch. To summarize, it's not the one-off that matters, but the pattern of this red flag behavior is what's going to get you in trouble. If you're still confused, this is what I want you to think about. If you are worried about misinterpreting and getting in trouble because of that, you will be most likely fine. If you, at one point, stop caring, if you just don't care whether you make a misinterpretation, or if the call gets dropped, or if our client is complaining, you just don't care. I think that's when you really should be careful with your work ethic. I hope this makes sense. Question number 5. How long are the calls usually? And what happens if I cannot finish the call that I'm on and have to leave? Call lengths can vary. I have had calls that came on and got dropped in less than a second. Sometimes they just go, "Oh, sorry, the member just hung up. No need for your service interpreter." And that's one call. Sometimes it goes on and on and on for 3 hours, so it's difficult to say how long the calls take. But if I were to just average it out, I would say generally 8 to 13 minutes would be the most common, or I would say most ideal call length for an interpreter. If you ever happen to have some emergency situation and you have to leave, your LSP will definitely have a policy regarding that. I mean, obviously, your health and safety always come first. If your house is on fire, you're not going to finish the call. You need to evacuate right away. If your baby has a crazy high fever, of course, you will have to excuse yourself and take care of your baby. If these things happen in the middle of a call, typically interpreters can transfer the call to an agent who works for the LSP who can transfer the call to another interpreter. This might or might not be available depending on the company you work for. Whatever it is, if you can, I think it's always good to clearly mention it to our client so that they know what's happening. Like, if you're sick and you don't think you can interpret, your client is not going to be like, "No, interpreter, you have to stay on the line and finish helping this patient, okay?" They're not going to do that. So instead of just dropping the call, which can become an issue on your end, inform the client, and hopefully there's another interpreter who can take over and continue helping them. Also, just be reasonable with your reasons. All of those emergency situations that I mentioned are reasonable, but dropping your call because your friend wants to hang out, or you forgot that you had a movie date with your boyfriend or girlfriend, in my opinion, life is important, but also so is work. So as long as you try your best to have good work ethic and professionalism, I really think you would be fine.